oil and gas for the ongoing O&M, and how, as that's been rolling out, how we could use that for our cost evaluations moving forward with the RTA, because that can be used for annual OEM and funding. So it's House Bill 230 that was already passed in the last session.
Right.
So welcome, everybody.
Yeah, we got a
See
good
some fresh
crowd.
new faces. Ryan, yep, Mayor Hayden, Mayor Dobbins, glad to have you here. Skylar, thank you for coming, Sky.
Always happy to be here.
Right. Kevin, all right, so let's go ahead and
I popped the agenda up, Michael,
thank you.
just so you can see it. Everyone can see it.
Yeah, so we're gonna just jump right in as we're kind of working through these, and we'll talk about the hearings and the times as we go through there. So looks like we got enough people online. Bill, if you want to go ahead and get started, that'd be great.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our meeting today. I'm just going to go real quick through the agenda. We're going to start with an update to the service goals document. I didn't get it out to everyone yet. It'll come shortly, but we've been working on it. The Fair and Peers team and has been working hard on it. And we're going to do that first because Holly would like some of that conversation to feed into the IGA. Then we're going to go through our public hearings that are going to start happening here in a week and a half. And then we can talk about when we want to get back together again. But I think it's once again going to be a pretty full agenda. So I'm going to turn toward if anyone has any questions or any other items you want to pull up and discuss, let me know maybe in the chat. But if I could call on maybe Jason and Michael to run through their updates to the service goals document. And guys, I can put this up on the screen if you want to kind of take it away.
Yeah, I'll just, thanks, Bill. Good to see everybody. I'll turn it right over to Michael from the Fair and Peers team, who's been working away on developing and refining. For context, a lot of the work that we had done previously within our original formation study and project list. So, Michael.
Hey everyone, good to see you. This is based off this service goal document that we've started to work through, and but what we now have done is actually brought in the dollar amounts for these and trying to match them to our various revenue sources. So what we've done here, and please note that this is very draft, this is very preliminary. The point of this is to workshop this with you. But what we've done here is we have assumed a low cost scenario and a high cost scenario. What that means on the low cost scenario is a 0.5% sales tax with the $1 million resort contribution. And then the high cost is trying to match the 1% sales tax and $1 million resort contribution. I know we're still kind of deciding on where we're headed on the final funding, so this of course can shift. The other thing that I'll note before we get into each of the service goals and what they mean from a cost standpoint is that we're assuming local costs. So this would mean that we would heavily need to be upfront about pursuing federal and state grants. So this is using typical operations splits and you know what we typically expect and see from other RTAs of what they're able to pursue and get awarded for grants and that. So again, this is based on local cost share. So working through each of these service goals, the service goal number 1 being the increase of the number and frequency of the buses on the Highway 40 corridor between Craig and Steamboat, which does assume RTA takes over SST's regional route, while SST continues to operate their operations just within the city limits of Steamboat Springs. The low cost is 1.5 million for that service if we were to provide 14 hours worth of service, 60-minute service, so consistently once an hour for 14 hours straight. And then the high cost of that is $1 million more, which is 2.5 million for 30-minute service during our AM and PM peaks and 60-minute service during our off peaks. Service goal number
Can I ask
two.
a
Yeah,
quick
go ahead,
question,
Bill.
Michael?
Yep.
I should probably know this question, but do those cost estimates include fare revenue or a fare-based system for that service?
No, they do not. That's a great question. They do not. This is operations costs, not inclusive of fares. So that would reduce that if we were to go down to the fares. Jason, am I speaking correctly on that?
Yeah, that's correct. It's essentially the total local investment, and fare revenue would and could be deducted from that. And just as a data point, and Jonathan may correct me on this, but typical within the industry is 20% that comes out of fares. So it's not as high as many people think, but that's kind of more of a national, is 20, maybe 25%. I don't know what the current fare recovery is for that route for SST. So I don't know if it's higher or lower than that, but it could be reduced. My point is, but don't expect it to be cut in half, for example. It would be smaller.
John?
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to
good
ask Jonathan if
question.
he had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm looking that up right now, and I'll put that in the chat.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Great. That's a great question, Bill. And thanks, Jonathan, for looking that up.
One thing
Service
to
goal
note-
number.
Hold on,
Oh, go
Michael.
ahead.
One thing to note on the fare, I know talking to Earl last night that they finally went to a free bus system. It was a cost for the first year and a half or 18 months with that 20%, if that's what that is. And then their plan was to try to increase ridership. So the Eagle Valley, he says they already went fare free. So just kind of realize on OEM, we just need to understand what that, if it's only 20%, do we charge a fare or not? But keep going.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Service goal number 2 is establishing the circulator bus route within Craig that would serve both the local transportation needs, but also connect to the Highway 40 bus route. Lower cost assumes 30-minute service, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. That would be $440,000 a year of the local cost share. On the higher side, that's $600,000 a year for 15-minute service during your peak times, and then 30-minute service during the off-peak times.
And just to that question we just discussed, and Michael, make sure that I'm saying this right, but all of the service options we're talking about, which are the next couple here in Craig, Circulator, and South Route service, same thing. We haven't accounted for any fare revenue.
Correct. And the other thing too is, as we're talking through these, if there are tweaks to this service that we need to be making. So for example, on the Highway 40 bus, the regional bus, we're looking at 14 hours worth of service, but we're estimating 12-hour service for some of this other stuff. So if we need to be adding 2 more hours into daily service, those are some things that we should be discussing and noting, and those could change some of the cost estimates here. If you scroll down to service goal number 3, this is providing new bus routes to the unserved areas, such as, South Route County and unincorporated areas along Highway 40, such as, Steamboat 2 and Heritage Park. We have calculated that for the South Route County services, which include a year-round daily fixed route service and then a seasonal weekend activity bus. That would be on the lower end, 300,000. That's 90-minute peak hour only service on the fixed route, and then seasonal peak hour only service Friday through Sunday. The higher end of that, is basically double the frequency. And that's essentially kind of the difference between low and high cost on most of these operational services is how frequent do we want these services to be. So for the higher end of that, it's doing 45-minute peak hour only service on the fixed route, and then keeping the same hours of Friday through Sunday peak hour for the seasonal weekend activity bus, and that brings it to 550,000. For the Steamboat 2 Heritage Park service, 60-minute service would be 610,000, closer to $1 million if we were to do that 30-minute service during the AM and PM peaks while providing 60-minute service during the off peak. I'll go ahead and pause for a second. I saw Jonathan had put that in there just in case. I'm educating myself here a little bit too, but just in case you didn't see that, overall cost per passenger in 2024 was $14.81 per passenger, fare recovery of $364 per passenger, so 28%. Subsidizing the other 932.
Any questions so far?
That's
And
pretty
also-
good. That's
It is. Yeah, I was going to note
really
that too.
good.
Yep. Yep. It is very good. And the levels of service that we're talking about here come from our original study, and are certainly not fixed. And they're not based necessarily on any sort of like revenue side generation, meaning like how much a given area served by a given route generates, and then we're going to match the service level to that. We did more of a transportation planning exercise saying, where do we see demand? Where are we hearing the need as well? So we were cognizant of what we were hearing from the different communities about demand and what they would like to see. But it is level set to a certain extent to kind of, what we think is appropriate relative to the demand and the potential ridership, and the ridership generation. That said, that's not the only way to slice the pie here, but I just wanted to provide that context.
Cool, thank you.
Jason, just another quick question. I may have missed this. How have you accounted for kind of initial capital investment versus ongoing operational expense?
Yeah, I mean, capital expenses are very lumpy. Tend to be really high in one year and then maybe nothing for a few years. And the way that we did that was we assumed as kind of a base to our entire costing the need for a certain amount of buses, the need also for a maintenance facility. But we did, and then again, as Michael noted, we took just the local portion, and then we amortized that. So that's a tougher one, right? Like it's hard to kind of get there immediately on equipment and a facility. But what we've seen from other RTAs is they kind of just, bootstrap it a bit in the early years, where they might be just leasing a facility. They might require a contractor to bring their own equipment. And so it's not agency owned equipment. It's, a private contractor that's like, when you do an RFP, let's say it's contracted service, for example, or you lease buses or you buy used buses initially, and you kind of get there over time as you can build up some capital reserves, because that's pretty typical, is that an agency saying, okay, we're taking in $10 million, we're going to put $1 million or $2 million every year into our capital reserves, then we'll spend it down. And so it's just, we tried to take a kind of approach that we thought was sensible, but the reality of implementation will look a little bit different.
And presumably could include bonding if
Right.
really not the bonds.
Yeah, that's a strategy for sure. Then you could get the funding up front and pay it back over time.
And I have a quick question tied in with that capital in the buses. Are we thinking at all of new and leased buses, or are we thinking of buying whatever the SST buses that are currently going? We just get more of them.
I think it's a great point. It's all somewhat to be determined, but we did account for what type of equipment would be needed on these various services, how much those would cost, how much we might be able to get from grant funding, and then what the local portion would be, and again, amortize that. But there's lots of strategies, to your point, Randy, in terms of how you might do that. And hopefully, yeah, there'd be some lease transfer, ownership transfer, I should say, from SST to the new RTA with some sort of agreement.
And acknowledging the comment in the chat as well as in this conversation. So it's not part of any of the service goals, or it's sort of part of some of the service goals, and we'll see that here in just a moment. But some of those things that are applicable across the board, I've put into the end of this document, where it's like, here's some of the additional costs that are, the vehicles, the RTA facility, the administrative costs, those are at the end there, after these service goals here. So we'll get to that in just a moment.
Right. I don't want to send us down a rabbit hole today on this topic, but is fare free and going fare free something that at some point we want to have as a consideration?
From Craig's point of view, I think maybe long term, but initially, in order to sell it, they're going to need to pay for it. There's no way Craig is going to buy in if it's free. It's just not going to happen.
Okay.
Bill, I agree with Randy. I think to start, I think we have it be fair for people to pay. I think that's a little more digestible with a new situation like we've got going on, and then doing what I guess Eagle Valley's doing, right? They started they charged fares, right? And now they're moving away from that. So did I hear that correctly?
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
Yeah,
they
that's true.
always planned, the ballot question promised a fare-free bus from Edwards to Vail. That always was a promise in theirs, but then they kind of it kind of bit the folks down in Eagle when Gypsum did not vote in and they weren't going to get their kind of extra services, so that they extended, I believe, fare-free service down to them. RAFTA does not charge, or does charge, and they believe that their riders need to pay something for their bus service. They need to have some kind of investment and skin in the game with their transit system. So at some point, we might want to invite like Dan Blankenship from RAFTA to just give us some reasoning behind why they have stuck with fares, while other systems have looked at going fare free. So, sorry, Mayor, go ahead.
No, thanks, Bill. No, that was very helpful, actually. And yeah, I guess I tend to lean more towards RAFTA. Not only, sorry, my 2-year-old's here.
Oh, that's all right.
But also I love the Velociraptor or RAFTA marketing they have. It's the most creative thing I've seen in government. So
Yeah, I agree. I think, yeah, it's always that kind of decision and conversation around ridership goals and trying to increase ridership as much as possible, and whether to charge and what to charge if you do have a fare. In this case, it's already established, and as Jonathan showed us here with these numbers, there's riders are used to it today. I certainly think just retaining that fare on the regional route, for example, it wouldn't be a surprise to anyone. But as Bill mentioned, like sometimes it's a way to get more voters on board if they think, oh wow, by approving this RTA, I'm going to get free bus service. Conversely, to Randy's point, in other communities that think, like, hey, this, we don't want to see just a handout. It's got to be, it's got to be some cost sharing. That's fine too, right? And so I think that's.
Won't we find a lot of that out during the polling period?
Yeah, we definitely in Eagle Valley, that really became, and RAFTA, when I did the RAFTA work, when we polled for RAFTA, we did poll on moving to a fare-free model, and their community rejected that. Whereas in Eagle Valley, darn well believe people wanted at least a portion of that system to be fare-free. That was critical in Eagle Valley. Every community is different. That's why we do the polling.
this is Sierra with South Route. Was there a reason why they wanted to commit to the payment structure?
Who, Sierra? I'm sorry.
Sorry,
Which-
Sierra with South Route.
No, which system are you asking about? I'm sorry.
The RAFTA where the writers are actually paying, did they cite a reason as to why they wanted to keep paying? Or I guess I just don't understand if service provided, why?
Right. So in 2018, RAFTA did go to the ballot for a major investment from their community to expand their system. And as part of that, we modeled keeping fares, reducing fares, or going fully fare free. And obviously, going fully fare free reduced how much they could do then, because RAFTA probably gets about 20% from its fare box. So when you look at going fully fare free, then you have to reduce your service offerings a corresponding amount. And the public said, no, we'd rather still pay our fares that we're used to paying to get that 20% bump in service, which was really off-peak service for the workforce. Buses running at midnight so waiters and bartenders could get home safely. I mean, that was the trade-off. And the community said, no, let's keep paying fares so that we can have that extra service level.
Okay, sorry, I missed that. Thank you so much.
No worries.
That captures it beautifully.
I'm dangerous. I know just too much about these different things. So
Ryan, you had a question?
I did, and we've kind of already talked about it, but I do think that from what I'm hearing from again in Hayden, CMO constituents, is that folks want more routes more often, and I think if we can do that with charging fares, I think that is the way to go. Especially, so we just our town council wanted our public works director to put together not a traffic study, just a collation of it, of course, from CDOT. And it's really interesting to see the level of traffic on, essentially, we looked at the Hayden Station generation plant, and how over the last 15 years now that the amount of traffic like off peak time is more than double, from like 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. It's just continuously busy. So I think that level of service, if we can swing it as much as possible with fares, would be a good place to go. But again, Bill, your polling will definitely, I think, show that too. So
Good call. Michael, why don't you keep going?
Great. Thanks all for the fruitful discussion there. Going on to the next service goal, which is providing the ground transportation options to and from the Yampa Valley Regional Airport. This would be, we're modeling this as two different routes. So one that serves the airport to Craig, and then another one that serves the airport over to Steamboat Springs. And so in the low cost scenario, we're looking at $1 million for 45-minute service on the route between Hayden to Steamboat Springs, and then 60-minute service on the route between Hayden to Craig. And that's for the 12-hour service period. And then bump that up by $500,000 if we want to do 30-minute service during the AM and PM peaks, and then 60-minute service during the off peak for both of those routes.
And when it comes
Any
to
questions?
Hayden, well, I think we need to consider when flights are flying in and out. So as we get further down this road, with the polling and such, Kevin, thank you for being here. But we definitely want to know kind of when you think the last flights on average come in, so we don't miss this. I would hate to leave at 6 p.m. and then a couple flights come in at 7 or 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So we need to consider that when we're looking at these service goals.
Put it more clearly, 12 hours of service in these service scenarios provide 1 million and then 1.5 million, depending on how frequent you want to do it. But you're right, Michael, the like at what time exactly, we'll figure that out. You're right.
Thank you. Keep going.
Improving existing bus stops is service goal 5. Based on our previous conversations with the committees, we've talked about expanding this a little bit more, making it more clear that we're doing first last mile connectivity and increasing transit access points. So that more tangibly, that includes developing new bus stops along the new currently unserved corridors, improving any of the bus stops that are there. But it also includes, coordination with bus stop amenities. What does that look like? Can I actually get there? Is there a good enough facility, whether that be, a landing pad, pedestrian walkway, whatever that looks like, to directly get me to these bus stops. And so this is where it gets a little bit tricky on this capital size, since we are putting it on an annual basis. We're estimating the low cost of roughly a little under $20,000 to improve 6 bus stops and build about 2 bus stops over the course of 5 years. And then post builds, we can use these funds more so for bus stop improvements and improving that first last mile infrastructure. And then on the high side, that's closer to about 60,000, but that allows us to improve about 8 bus stops and build about 4 bus stops over the course of 5 years. Again, the reality, the implementation of that, of how many bus stops a year are we improving versus building, may be a little bit different. You're probably not, you may just get the money in the reserve to just go out and do 1 bus stop, and then you keep going that way. So that's some of the pieces in there. I'll pause there for any questions, comments on that service goal.
Keep going.
Okay. Service goal number 6 is creating park and ride lots for commuters accessing the Highway 40 bus route and any of the other new bus routes. Basically, the difference between low and high cost is whether we're investing in 3 park and rides over the course of 10 years or 4 park and rides over the course of 10 years. And so, and the factors within here is not only the number of park and rides, but also the, how long do we want to take to pay this off. So we want to do it in 5 years, double that cost for each of these. But currently, annually looking at 60,000 versus 80,000 to pay that off.
And in these, you're assuming we still haven't located where, what kind of cost or land costs on the capital side of this, correct? That's
Correct.
just maintenance on an annual basis. Okay.
Yeah, because the land cost is so variable. It's a great point. We don't have an assumption around land cost. It's all build cost. Mainly because, and hopefully you can, find the land through partnerships, primarily between public agencies. But that's a good argument, possibly, to raise the cost of some of these.
Just need to be real. All right, keep going.
Service goal number 7 is supporting the roadway safety improvements, such as crosswalks, other pedestrian improvements, in particular adjacent to bus stops on regional routes, through the planning, the coordination, and possibly, providing financial support in the form of matching funds for state or federal grants. And this, we added one more sentence in here from the previous version, which is that the RTA would expand existing efforts in improving pedestrian safety at the key locations, such as at Highway 40 and Heritage Park. Something that we heard is and we can keep talking about this too, of when we're going to the public and saying, hey, we're already investing in our safety, in our roadway safety in particular. Here's an example. In order for us to be more committed to this long term, that's why we're establishing this as a service goal for the RTA. On the cost side of things, it really is just how much do we want to be putting into this fund and how much do we want to be contributing on a yearly basis. This is flexible, but we've modeled it as $250,000 to $500,000 a year.
Yeah, just adding on
Mhm.
to that. Yeah, just because that's a great point. That, what we're showing you right now is really just for your eyes only at this point. And that may be something you want to consider to keep it that way going forward. I think you want to give enough detail, but also give yourself maximum flexibility, especially when it comes to any sort of IGA ballot language, things that are really out there and committing responsibilities. But what we've seen with other RTAs is this kind of detail is really helpful when it comes to the education and advocacy campaign, where you're able to translate, hey, this is what it generally is going to mean for the community, and give that sense of quantity and service levels and that kind of thing. But I think we want to be careful about how widely you lock yourself into 30-minute service, you know, AM, PM, peak period, blah, blah, all these kind of details we're showing you here. So, but that's also a discussion point for you all, and something for you to think about going forward.
Thank you.
I think Sonia has a hand raised.
Oh, yeah.
Sonia?
Hey, thanks. I'm challenged with technology today. I'm sorry for being a few minutes late. Jason, I think you make some very good points there regarding this project, about what level of specificity do we want to provide to the voters. And I'm, thinking that that is something that we can, as we go down the road, hammer down. Am I correct in understanding that this exercise we're doing right now is really just to review what has already been studied and looked at and sort of vetted through this group, and that, when we get down to the brass tacks of what we're going to really say, here are flagship projects, that's going to be a next step? Or are we kind of doing, is that the process that we're going through right now?
Yeah, the first option is, yeah, that's where we're trying to reconcile the previous work, but also bringing it to and trying to land it to the two scenarios, saying like, okay, if you pass a 0.5% sales tax and in combination with funding from the resort, what can you do? And then also, if you were to go 1%, what can you do? And so that's the second piece of this exercise. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That helps. I think one of the things that I would like for us to just, be tracking a little bit with is some of the improvements that are already underway. And you spoke about it for this project, but, if we get down the road a little further and we're into, August, and we've actually shown some success at getting money, and we're at, 65% design on this project or whatever it looks like, I think those are really compelling things to put forward as, we're not just asking you, we are invested. So I just wanted to keep stressing that message to our group, because having been in DC last week and talking to our federal delegation about transportation funding, I was able to get some good information from the city of Steamboat Springs, town of Hayden, about what you guys are either wanting to do or what is currently being held up that has already been approved. And assuming we can get some of that money through the pipeline, it might come to us like at a time that we're packaging these this information for the voters. So we might be able to, take some of those already existing projects. And I'm thinking like that bridge that you're working on in Hayden, or even, what city's doing with 40, and kind of bundle them in as a part of this programming, even though we know they're primarily funded. Does that make sense? Okay, Michael, sounds good.
Looks good.
Get to keep moving forward here. Service goal 8, which is establishing the RTA as a stakeholder in commuter and regional rail discussions. We have the language in here saying that, it could potentially be possible financial support in the form of matching funds. We want to run that by you. I will say that for our cost estimates, we did not estimate anything. So we did not, at the current stage, we're just saying, if you're going to be a stakeholder in the discussions, then that's probably just going to be some administrative costs. There's no low, high cost estimate of specifically contributing to that, the same way that we did, for the safety the roadway safety, where it's like, we're just, low cost 250, high cost 500. Here there is no low cost, high cost. Wanted to confirm that that is the direction that we want to head at the moment. Go ahead, Sonia.
Yeah, I'd like to take a pause here for just a second and give you guys an update. So our partners at the state were very interested in attending this meeting to sort of get a sense of where we're at with the RTA and what the Mountain Rail project looks like relative to that. I'm just going to be very clear about the fact that they have been very clear with us that we will need to bring local funding to the table in order to operate the commuter line. And I mean, that obviously makes all the sense in the world, given that it would be sort of unconscionable for the state to not only invest in all of the capital improvements for our commuter line, but then also run it, given that they have a whole lot of population and a whole lot of need elsewhere. So, you know, when we think about what does this look like for the RTA, I mean, I think this group needs to be pretty clear about what we think we're doing before we would invite anybody from the state in, if we would. The reason the state is interested in this is they very much want to help us with funding for the RTA, for one, because there's some new funding sources available, and then also just some funding for rail through the Clean Transit Enterprise. But I think the message I'm getting is, you know, we want you to be successful, and we want to be involved to help make sure that you are setting up your RTA in such a way that it is ready to tap into the pipelines of funding that are available. So first point is, I feel very strongly that rail needs to stay in. You know, I think at this stage in the game, before the service development plan is complete and presented, which is more of a late March timeframe, we don't know what those costs look like. So I think it's fair to leave it in there with no cost, but with the flag that once we have the STP, we will know what those costs might be, or we will know that we will have a starting point for discussion about what costs we might be willing to shoulder. And then the second piece of that is, you know, is this group comfortable if we were to invite folks from the rail planning process into the next meeting, just so that they can kind of get a sense of where we're at and provide us any input that I have not been able to provide.
Okay, thank you for that update, and keep us involved. Is that I definitely think we need to keep the mountain rail as a side note in this, but it has to be in all the discussions, because you know, yeah, just so everyone here knows on the call, we're getting a lot of in this mountain rail line will be a state funded, most likely endeavor by the governor, but in order to have our commuter line, they're going to tap into the local resources. So we just need to keep that in the back of our heads. We don't want it to derail this RTA. So I'd be curious to see how we formulate some questions during the polling as we move forward with how much we're going to work on. Ryan?
Michael, before we get back to Ryan, my second point was actually a question, which nobody answered. And that was, you know, are people comfortable with us inviting somebody from the state who's working on Mountain Rail to our next meeting to kind of see where we're at with our discussions? And so think about that for 1 minute, and then your other point sparked a second point with me, and I've forgotten what it was. Jeez.
One quick note: we do have in the current draft of the IGA express, I guess, acknowledgement that the RTA may provide financial support for these other rail and transit services. You're the stakeholder, and you may provide financial support. So yeah, there's no lack of authority. We definitely have a placeholder.
So can we then just assume that unless we hear opposition here within the next, before we go to the next point, that people are comfortable with us inviting somebody from the state just to kind of hear where we're at?
I'm all for it. Excuse me.
Yeah, I'm all for it.
Yeah, same. I think it'll be good to get them perspective of what we're doing versus what they're doing.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I like to keep the communication open between entities.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry, Ryan, didn't mean to cut you off there.
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
No, you were. It was honestly in line with what I want to talk about anyway, Sonia. So I don't want to derail us, the group, with bringing in more discussion about Mountain Rail, but you know, we talked to Paul, our council did, from the state, and there is no commuter rail system that does not operate under an RTA in the state, if not like anywhere. So that's just something to keep in mind. And we're all in the buses. I totally get it, but if that commuter rail is something that our valley wants and this group is really passionate about, it is, you know, I may be wrong here, but it's going to have to operate under this RTA. And I do wonder if it is a moment in time where we leverage that momentum to create the RTA and to get this funding off the ground. I'm not saying that's the answer or anything, but I know we've been kind of pushing the rail to the side a little bit and not really addressing it. But if that's something we really want to do, I think we have to at least bring them in to the conversation and then see if that shifts some of our service goals too.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump back to the other point. Thank you. I agree with you 100%, Ryan. The other point that your messaging sparked with me, Michael, is that, as far as polling goes, we did add a survey question to Yampa Valley Housing Authority survey that went out to 4,000 people in the Housing Authority service territory, which does include most of Route, not all of Route. Sorry, there are some areas that are not in it. But I think it will be informative because I'll find the question and put it in the chat so we don't have to take more time. But basically, the question is aimed towards finding the trade-off between if it takes longer, but it's more safe, would you do it? And things like that. So I think we will have some good data about how people are responding, at least in that sort of subset of our community. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. No, and Ryan, on your sense, regardless of whether I know Paul DeRoche with the CDOT, it said, it's not normal, but we have such a unique, we're at such a spot with our deforming an RTA and dealing with Mountain Rail that if we tried to divide those up, I think it would cause mass confusion with our constituents and the electorate. So I really think that everyone's already assuming it's connected, the commuter rail and the RTA. So I don't know the best way to frame that conversation moving forward, because that is a road that we haven't crossed with RAFTA or Eagle Valley or San Miguel is trying to add that in there. But we know that it's something we have to consider. And right now, to me, it would confuse a lot of people if we tried to split them up. The one thing is we have to do is focus on what Yampa Valley can do right now with rubber on the roads. And I appreciate exactly the IGA that Polly was talking about has a placeholder to be involved in those stakeholder conversations. Again, we won't even know how much it's going to cost until later on in the spring.
This conversation, however, is suggesting that in the IGA, what we say now is we may be able to provide funding, and maybe we want to say provide funding and operate aspects of those systems.
Yeah.
I'll just note, just maybe that's a word of caution, just that, when we did outreach in our project a year and a half ago, the rail was one of the most polarizing projects, in contrast to, say, running a lot more buses on Highway 40, almost everyone was like, yep, love it. But when it came to rail, it was like, I hate it or I really love it. Like there was just kind of no in between. And so you run some risk, I think, at the ballot box when it comes to the funding commitment, because the other thing is that, rail is so expensive that, even at our high cost scenario, all your money could go to rail and still really not get anywhere with rail. It could provide some matching funds, but it's so massive in its cost that if you really want to go and support rail, you'd be putting all your budget plus every grant you could get.
Yeah, no, we're not doing that off the gate.
Yeah,
Jason,
just as something there.
Times have changed a ton. There have been a ton of Mountain Rail open houses up here, and even the doubters are really excited. By way of example, I'll just tell you that Yampa, and you remember how we heard from Yampa about not wanting to grow and not wanting the people coming and etc. The mayor of Yampa came to the meeting in Hayden, the open house meeting, and sort of cornered the state people, saying that Yampa wanted a part of the line. So there's been a lot of progress made on helping people understand where Mountain Rail is at since we did that study. So I think, getting more specifics about this and where is the thinking on it currently is going to be super helpful. And I do think some of those questions that I just dropped in the chat from the Housing Authority survey will be informative, recognizing that they don't include everyone, but it's a different time, I think, for the project.
Okay. Michael, let's go ahead and get back onto your service goals. We got a few other things to keep going through.
Sure, and we're almost done here. I had mentioned a little bit earlier in our conversation, there's some things that are not included, but would be part of they're not included in the service goals, but these costs would be associated with this. And so the first line here is the annual cost of vehicles. We are assuming 12 years of service per vehicle. So on an annual basis, that gets you somewhere between 200 to 275, depending on your service levels and how many, reserve buses you actually are going to need for those service levels that you determine. The next one being that annual cost of the RTA admin facility, about 1.2 to 1.6 million, depending on your desired amenities, your construction costs. And as Jason had pointed out, in your first years, maybe you're not pursuing your admin art, a specific facility for the RTA. You're leasing that, you're having, you're contracting that out. So a contractor is holding those buses, bringing those buses, storing those buses. And then finally, admin costs. From our research into different RTAs, what we've been able to determine is that roughly 10% of your total costs are going to be going to admin, such as staffing, IT, legal, other things like that. And so that's depending on, again, your service levels and your total costs, somewhere in that 750 to 1.1 million range. So summarize all of that, when we kind of sum it all up, our low cost is a little over 6 million. We're at 6.3 million, and our high cost is at 9.8 million in the current configuration and in the current way that the service goals are laid out. Now compare that to our revenue estimates, which are, if we do a 0.5% sales tax and $1 million resort contribution, we're sitting at about $7.4 million a year. And then on the high end, which is the 1% sales tax and $1 million resort contribution, that's 13.8 million. So in other words, if we were to pursue the low cost, we could, or the low cost service levels, we could cover that with the revenue, and that was the purpose of this exercise here. And similarly, on the high cost, we'd actually have a little bit more of that buffer between revenue and the cost, which leads to say, that likely means we could actually increase some of the lower end of our service levels to match this a little bit more. So we could probably provide a little bit more service if we wanted to on some of these, on the various service goals, and we can have the discussion of as to where do we prioritize some of that service. So that's me going through all of those service goals and the low versus high and how those are matching to the various revenue sources. Happy to keep having this conversation, answer any more questions or comments.
All right, open it up. What do you guys think when you see those numbers?
I'm thinking that that's within the costs. It's just a question of what we want, because if we're looking for off hours and more frequency in off hours, you're looking towards the higher cost than the lower cost. And that's my only concern, is that yes, we can increase the low costs, but the low costs I don't think are going to meet the needs for most of what we're looking for. Could be wrong, but
is anybody surprised?
I'm not surprised, but it's intimidating to see the numbers. But I think I'm in line with Randy as well. I think about our constituents here in town and the amount of kind of obscure times that we're going to need service. I think initially I lean towards the higher cost just so we can get that broader spectrum of service, but it's intimidating.
Yeah. It's a team effort, Mayor Dobbins.
Yes, it is.
But I agree. And I agree. There's going to be some areas that when we start looking at this and really honing in, especially with your south route, stopping at bus service at 6 p.m. is not reasonable when you got people, so it's the extended service that may go once every hour or something like that, as long as people have transportation home at night. But we'll go through all those details much later.
Yeah.
In the springtime.
Exactly.
So let me give you a little perspective from county and what we've been spending money on. I'm leading with the punchline, which I think we need to go for the high revenue scenario. part of that is, I think we need to be thinking big. I think we need to be thinking visionary. And part of that is just that I think we need to be realistic about rising costs. I mean, I think I told you guys on one of these last calls that we had to transfer $9 million from our equipment pool into our asset purchasing just to offset the rising cost of some of this heavy equipment that we're dealing with. So I don't know why we would think it would be any different when we think about acquiring buses or anything like that. I think those costs are only going to go up. And, again, I'm going to qualify these points with the fact that we do need to get a sense of where the electorate's at. And I also hate sales tax so much. But, I think with the theme of our transportation infrastructure is unsafe, the visitor's largely going to pay this cost, which is not 100% correct. Those two things alone, I think, make us poised for success if we have a good campaign. Now, if we don't, and we also have 4 city council seats here in Steamboat Springs, at least, and I don't know what the rest of you have on your ballots, then we fail. So I'm all in on the high revenue and getting ourselves organized to pitch this hard.
Thank you, Sonia. Michael, is there anything more that we want to do on your service development? I know we do have to go through the IGA and a few others, and it is getting late.
I don't have any more besides responding to anything that you may have questions about, but I'm good.
Stay on board. Thank you very much. All right, Polly, do you want to go on the IGA?
Yes, absolutely. So I have 2 objectives. One is to just get a little bit of feedback on the revisions that came out of our last meeting, which actually were pretty light. So I think given how we've done this in the past, I'll go ahead and just walk through them quickly. And then we had a series of kind of mandatory terms that we just need to check off our list and make sure that we're comfortable with those mandatory terms. And then I also wanted to touch briefly on the terms of transition of the regional SST service that are in here, because my sense is it's a pretty good placeholder, but want to again just get whatever feedback we want, because out of this meeting, just to preview where we're going, this will probably be the version that we take. Will be the version that we take to the first public hearings.
What?
So.
Do you want me to pull up a document?
Actually, let me go ahead. I have
You'll do it? Okay.
Oh, actually, no, let's go ahead and let's do the red line. It may be easier for you to do it, Bill.
PDF?
The PDF that shows the comparison.
Okay. It's coming up. Okay. You just tell me where to be.
So let's start at the top and just page down. I still have a placeholder here, which will come out of the final to remind us that we need to think about if and how we want to reflect resort contribution or resort role in the new RTA. And I think this remains premature. Is that I'm probably looking mostly at you, Michael and Dan. So let's go down to the first change, Bill. Like I said, there wasn't much here. We've been through most of this. This was just a note. I think, Sonia, you had mentioned that it would be easy for you to confirm whether or not the Routt County clerk could coordinate the Craig election also. And
and I have a question on that, because that was for Sonia and for us. Is there any reason why Routt County needs to do our election? That was almost every council member asked me that. Why are they doing it instead of us?
Well, so I don't even know where the idea came up of that we would do it, but we do coordinate in elections. And I think what happened, Randy, was I think it just went that since Moffett is not participating in the RTA, and they are typically the ones who administer your elections, would they want to? And then would there be a possibility that Routt could if they did not want to? It's a pretty easy answer. No, Routt County cannot. So we decide whether it's Craig or Moffett County, you know, running that portion of the election.
Right, and we already have elections scheduled. That was the other thing. Moffett County will have an election scheduled and all set. There'll be some cost, but not that big a deal. It just didn't make sense to me, and we've continually said that. So thanks for the answer, Sonia.
Yep.
No, thank you, and we'll just pull this off. And we'll put it on our, sounds like Randy, you are, have that well in hand with Moffett County. We do have a couple of questions that are, you know, in front of Moffett County that are more for the commissioners. Okay, I think we're ready for the next. I'll just pull that comment out. Okay, so these were just some notes and tweaks that came out of our early conversations on service goals and funding from the last meeting. There were two related revisions. This provision was really intended. There's nothing here that limits authority. These are all the sorts of things that if there's any question, we're expressly calling out the authority to do these things. So I pulled out much of the trail and related language and instead translated our discussion into this provision, which says the authority may coordinate, operate, and financially support transportation to provide access for residents and visitors to public recreational amenities such as federal, state, and local parks and trails. And I also changed shall to may with respect to support to be provided for roadways and wildlife corridor crossings. So again, these are not mandatory, but they provide clear intent and authority to support these things as the authority wishes.
So Polly, this is a super nitpicky question on some levels, but I get very paranoid about limiting language. So I guess my question is, do we need to add regional here or local just to be like fully explicit about which types of efforts can be supported?
That is not nitpicky, and I'll make a note. I think that's a good addition.
Okay.
And I presume your preference is local.
Yeah, local. I mean, I was thinking local and regional, just
Okay.
because we're, you know, it's a regional transportation authority, right? But I don't know. I mean, I'd almost rather be more redundant, which is redundant in and of itself, and name everything that we might possibly want to do.
Yeah, so here we are. So it would say then coordinate, operate, and financially support transportation to provide access for local and regional residents and visitors to public recreational amenities.
Oh, sorry, I was referring to the wildlife question previous to that.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
because it just says state and federal efforts. So like somebody could maybe make the case that if it was just a smaller local effort, it shouldn't be supported.
Yes, that's good too. And if you're comfortable with the other, I'll leave it alone. Because it does refer to residents and visitors.
All right.
Okay, let's go to the next. This is where I struck the prior provision that related to construction and maintenance of regional trails and pedestrian infrastructure. And again, none of this is limiting language. It's this whole section is about items that optically you want to highlight or you want to assure that the authority has authority to do. So this is baseline funding, and out of our last discussion, I added a new provision that just acknowledges that there may be other sources of revenue that the authority collects in fees and tolls and rates and charges associated with the use of the transportation system. And that's, you know, no big deal. As we page down the question, we put vehicle registration fees back in again to provide that option. what you put on the ballot language is what you're gonna do out of the box. But this is, again, actually gives rise to another question, which is whether you want to expressly preclude any of the authorized funding options, and in particular, those two that I think there was pretty clear discussion that nobody wants to take on were property tax and visitor benefit tax collection. Right now,
I have a question, Polly, and this might be a more Sonia Michael question. On the LMD, I understand why you guys don't want to have anything to do with it. But with Craig, we are reauthorizing, that'll be on the ballot in 2025. And we have the possibility of increasing our LMD 2, 3, 4, whatever we wanted to, dedicating just to the RTA. Does that have to be excluded? Because then that limits us from doing that.
Yeah, let me layer on a piece to that, Randy, because I'm so glad you brought this up. I think I have been thinking more in the brain of Steamboat Springs, and also in the brain of like this having to be uniform. So I guess what I'm trying to understand, because so Steamboat Springs we know doesn't want to increase just because it's been increased so much, but the county now at the state legislature is potentially getting the authority to do an up to 6% lodging tax. And, we currently have the authority to do 2%, and we haven't. Now, granted, unincorporated Routt County doesn't have a tremendous amount of lodging, so it's not huge money. Anyway, the point is not that. The point is that how does this track? So if, let's just say, can we write the language? And I don't know if this is preferable, Michael, maybe you need to weigh in here, but should we write the language in such a way that new visitor benefit tax could be applicable, but existing not so much? And I hate that idea on some levels because it creates, this confusion and inconsistency, and I don't even know if it's legal or necessary. So I guess that question is to you, Michael, because will those people who fought you guys hard on the short-term rental tax see this as a threat? And if so, do we need to exclude them, or do we just say that this legally has to be a uniform situation that is available to all, and off we go?
Yeah, I don't know the answer just yet on that. I do know that from some casual conversations that we can use, and Dan Foot's online, but there is a mechanism for us to use the short-term rental tax as part of the Steamboat percentage. But again, that bucket of money is, looked at in a lot of areas. The way the ballot language allows us is to use the short-term rental tax for transportation. But to answer your question about how that layers on top of what the county can do, I don't know where we'd go right there. I know that the appetite of raising any lodging tax would be very poor on the city of Steamboat. We've taxed our lodging is pretty maxed right now.
And
So
I agree.
We have to be careful about how we increase that if you guys put a tax on top of it.
And I agree, Michael. I'm just trying to figure out, as Sonia said, can we separate you guys from Moffat County? Because our Moffat County tourism tax, that's 2%. If that does pass, we can look at adding another 2% there, and we can look at adding another 2 or 3 or whatever we wanted with our LMD through Moffat County that would be dedicated directly to the RTA.
Polly, there'd be no limitation on that.
No, there isn't. These are taxes that are levied by the RTA as the RTA. And so individual members can tax in whatever ways they want and pledge, which is an approach that, there were some pledges in the Eagle Valley Transportation Authority as opposed to direct RTA taxes. So I don't see, nothing here would preclude anything that Craig wanted to do or anybody else wanted to do directly.
So, Polly, one thing is strategy, which is, I think from a strategy perspective, I think we should expressly exclude property tax. And we can weigh in on that later, whether we all agree, but I think we were kind of in big agreement on no property tax for reasons. But then the question is, if we do continue to enable visitor tax, and then the RTA itself says we're going to, like, would the RTA have to levy a visitor tax of the RTA, or could then the members through their lodging tax create a member contribution?
Both could happen.
Yes, and I agree entirely with Polly. I'll just say you would want to consult with your legal counsel on how you run that ballot issue, because you don't want to have any limiting language if your intention is to pledge it to the RTA.
Yeah, and I do think that we ran some of those pledges in our ballot initiatives, as I'm remembering, where it wasn't clear we had to, but we did.
So to the formation committee, would you guys be comfortable then not precluding visitor benefit tax so that we could potentially, make sure that that is something that we can access? But yes, precluding property tax so that we can message around that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and I'm great with that too. That's what I'm looking for.
I would also agree.
Okay, and what that'll mean mechanically is that you'll bind, the new RTA board until such time as they can go through amendment processes for this agreement. If they ever wanted to do it, they'd have to go through the express amendment process.
Right, but it doesn't bind the individual jurisdictions from doing it and pledging the revenue, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Okay. So the idea is I'm going to just summarize where I think we left this. We are not going to call out visitor benefit tax as a baseline funding source, but we are going to expressly exclude the authority's power to impose property taxes in this agreement. And we will retain our section 709, where I have the margin code comment, which says, except as we've specifically provided, nothing limits the authority's powers under its act. And its act does allow visitor benefit taxes.
So I think I understand that, Polly. I'm just making sure, if you don't mind.
Yes, go ahead.
So what you're saying is, because the act enables and allows for visitor benefit, there's no need for us to explicitly state it within this, because we haven't, right as of now, identified that we are going to use it.
Yes.
Okay.
But we will expressly preclude the RTA from imposing property taxes.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. If no objections, I think, I can't remember, Bill, if we have any more, but let's see if there was anything else we should hit. Okay, I think that's it. If everybody's comfortable with that discussion, I have the last kind of items that we needed to touch on in this meeting to be ready for public meetings.
Yep.
And Bill, if you don't mind, I'll share a summary document that I think might be easy for people to have on the screen for reference.
Yeah, you should be able to share. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. Here we are. All right, I think I'm going to do this. Get rid of this.
So the plan, folks, while we're here, is we want to make sure this IGA is amicable for everybody, so that when we start having our first public hearing, do we have to have these signed or just ready to sign, Polly?
Neither, actually.
Okay.
We just have, we'll go through, well, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Kirsten will walk us through what that process will be. But
Okay.
there'll be, we'll have something that can be signed and has authority to be signed after the second meeting.
And question to Dan, as we're thinking through this, Dan, thanks for sharing this with our attorney, Eric. I have been out of town. I haven't had a chance to circle back with him on the IGA or any of this stuff on the public hearing. Has he gotten back to you with anything?
No, I have not heard from Eric.
Okay. I'll check in with them.
Okay, so with that, let me jump into these last items, which I've highlighted. So I'm going to start with termination because it seems weird to go to what you do when you dissolve without going to what your term and termination are. So we have to have terms in here that say how long we last. This IGA contemplates that once it's been approved by voters and certified, it will continue in existence until all of the then current members decide in writing to terminate it. And that's a pretty, common approach to take. The only limitation on that is by statute. The RTA cannot be terminated so long as there are outstanding bonds. And of course, that just makes sense. You won't be able to finance if you can do that. So any thoughts or concerns about those first two kind of basic term and termination provisions?
No, seems good to me.
Okay, then we go to provisions for distribution, disposition, or division of assets. And again, this isn't a particularly complicated provision. So after you've paid all the bonds, assuming there are any, net assets are distributed in proportion to the amount of cash and value of property and services contributed minus what they've received previously, and then the total amount of authority taxes or other charges they've paid into the authority. And it's those two pieces added together for each of the member entities that create their proportional allocation of whatever assets the authority holds at the time of termination. Okay.
No concerns? Okay, keep going.
Okay, so wow, we're on fire. Now here's one that's provisions for amendment this is where we have a supermajority vote. And with the exception of authority boundaries and ballot questions, the IGA can be amended only by a resolution that's approved by the board of the authority. And it has to be approved by a majority affirmative vote of all of the governing bodies of the members minus one. So the IGA board approves the amendment, takes it back to its member entities, and all of the member entities except one have to approve it. And this represented a concern with either holdouts or kind of, I'll say, the more powerful or more populous areas, really controlling what happens.
So this is the stuff you never want to have to enact, but when you do, you hope you got it right in the IGA and then the language. So can we just walk through again, like, what does a supermajority look like and what does a quorum look like? And let's just, a supermajority, if all members are present, is pretty easy, right? But what if they're not?
Well, so this has a lot of process associated with it too, Sonia. So you just wouldn't be able to vote on amendments to this agreement unless you had all of your board members there, except one. You have to get everybody except one. Then you have to get all your governing bodies of your individual members. So the authority first goes to the table with an amendment. If you can get an amendment out of your board, then you still have to go back to your member entities. And so this is not going to be a one and done. And really the intent is this is the foundation, infrastructure document for the authority, and any changes to it really have to be fully considered
I think this is appropriate. I mean, just my experience with our climate action plan, and everybody here is party to it, is that we do have similar language, and it has been considered to be a pain in the tail by the board of the Climate Action Plan Collaborative. And at one point they considered trying to undo it. And those of us who believed in the IGA being sufficient, maybe there were some things that could have been tweaked, but it's opening up your IGA becomes an opportunity to open up so many things that maybe you don't want to open up. So I think that this is kind of a very wonky and kind of harsh way to make amendments, but if you get it right in the first place, that's appropriate and good.
Yeah, I agree.
So layer number 2 is boundaries. So if you want to change the boundaries, it's also with the approval of, so you have to get the member entities, the board, and then you go to the electors of the area to be added or let's see, we said added or taken out of the territory of the authority. And actually there's a withdrawal provision. So this is a little bit different. It probably would be more relevant to unincorporated entities. There's going to be a 2-part process here. But in any event, you also have to go back to your electors if you want to add territory. And it would be the electors within the territory to be added. So much as you join in the first place, you'd be joining or changing boundaries in subsequent instances. And then you cannot, once you've agreed on the ballot questions for these initial, that will be attached to this agreement, those can't be amended. You'll go back in the future with separate ballot questions if you want additional funding or need to change any funding choices that have to be approved by voters.
So the only question I have with this is if, for example, 10 years down the road, Moffat County decides that, yes, they want to be part of this, that means that it needs to be a supermajority acceptance by the board before it does anything else, correct?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And all the other jurisdictions. So you go board, member jurisdictions, and then Moffat County would have to vote.
Cool. On that next one, which you talked about the limitations, if any of the powers granted by the RTA law may be exercised by the authority, and we don't have any proposed, but what would be an example?
Well, actually, we did just do one, which was we have limited the powers of the authority to implement property taxes or to impose property taxes.
Okay. Thank you.
We could have said, if everybody hates mountain rail, thou shalt never have rail.
Gotcha.
So there, that's something that could be tailored in a variety of ways.
All right, moving forward. Withdrawal.
Okay, so withdrawal. So members can withdraw with an election of the voting electors of that member who wants to withdraw. And in that circumstance, the territory is withdrawn. I'm really just reading through this summary. Territory is excluded from the boundaries. Taxes won't be levied any further, and the obligations of the member under the IGA terminate. And if there are bonds outstanding when they withdraw, they continue to pay whatever tax revenue is pledged to those bonds, even if they've withdrawn until that obligation expires. So if we look at additional members, this also allows the addition of members by adoption of a resolution of the board. And you can impose conditions. So presumably those conditions would be related to what funding is contributed or facilities are contributed. If, for example, you took on, another, I think we had been looking at, some districts who are going to pledge some of their local transportation facilities. Has to be approved by the electors. And, whatever conditions of new members may apply at the time under existing law. So the process for joining and withdrawing is really incorporates the same steps, with the exception of the 2 public hearings that are required to join in the first place.
Cool.
And that covers our mandatory provisions. The only other provision that I wanted to be sure to highlight was that we do have some kind of general language that covers the transition of the SST regional facilities over to the new authority. It contemplates that as of the beginning of the year after the formation, the funds associated with or that Steamboat is using to operate those facilities will start coming to the authority, and the authority has to spend those on the continued operation of those services. And then there is an obligation to put together a more detailed transportation plan that would would require the full transition of those facilities and services over to the RTA within a 24-month period. This is a pretty, I'll just say when we were looking at Eagle Valley, this was something that we worked on well past the initial board, approvals or initial approvals, and was finally approved along with ballot language later in the summer. I think the real question is whether there is anything here that, this is a pretty light and general approach that contemplates the development of a plan and some guidelines for that plan. So I think this is probably in the first instance a question for Michael and Dan to say, is this okay? Is there anything here that you think is not initially workable as we kind of flesh out more details? And you may have already looked at this in more detail, Dan in particular. This starts in 8.02 and 8.03, pages 15.
Yeah, I don't see any major problems, although I haven't really heard back from any of my council members, so remains to be seen how they view it, but no obvious problems in my mind.
Okay. Our objective here is to have something that we're comfortable enough to take to the public comment process and I'll say more granular input from everybody's individual governing bodies, councils, commissioners.
On that sheet that we're looking at right here, he says sources of funding and it has the word property tax. Can we get rid of that on there?
Yeah, and this hasn't been conformed to our last discussion. I really used it for the summary it provides of these highlighted provisions.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, so when it's attached, I'll have it conformed to the discussion today.
Perfect.
So those were the topics I wanted to cover. I did want to kind of make a general call for anything else you saw that you want to tweak before we go to public comment or public hearings.
All right, hearing none, you guys are comfortable with it. Good job, Polly and Kristen. Thank you.
I'll turn it over to Kirsten now.
Thank you. So Bill has distributed some templates for you to use, and there's no magic to them. I think that it's fine for you to tailor and cull back things that are not particularly relevant to your, entity process, but hopefully those are useful. And there's a memorandum to go in the packet that gives some detail about the RTA process, the IGA, we contemplate attaching Bill's timeline and this chart once Polly has finished conforming it. If you wish to include those in your packet. And Bill is pulling together a slide deck presentation for the hearings. I think one of the most important things that I've heard today in your conversation is you're emphasizing the polling that will occur as one opportunity to get feedback. But I think this is a critical part of the public hearing process. So the RTA Act does use the term public hearing, and we've had some questions about the distinct difference between that and public meeting. There's no prescription in the act, though, so you can follow your local hearing process. I think one of the analogous procedures is when you're applying for state and federal grants, the state will say you've got to have a public hearing in front of your governing body. And Dan, please jump in because you probably have examples from hearing processes that you do in Steamboat. But the key is just opening the public hearing, having the chair open the public hearing. You'll have your elected body Q&A of staff and Bill for the presentation on the RTA formation process. And then key is taking any public comment, and that I know can vary by jurisdiction, whether you have them sign in to speak or how you take written comments. But I would say take as much comment as you can in any format you can, and then that will also help, I think, inform the issue around some of the discussion we've heard today about rail and things like that. If you have any questions, if even after today, if you review the materials and have questions about content, we're happy to respond to that now or as you review those materials. The other key thing to keep in mind is the act requires 2 public hearings at minimum before you can send this IGA on to CDOT and the neighboring jurisdictions to formally start the timeline for their review and comment period. So while this might be a little bit confusing because resolutions typically are 1 reading and they take effect immediately, this will be a little bit different. So the first public hearing, you're just taking the public hearing, opening the hearing, taking the Q&A and the public comment, closing the public hearing. The second public hearing that is contemplated, that is where you will put your resolution for proposed approval of the IGA in its initial format. Again, we've had a lot of discussion. I think everyone understands now that that will get modified possibly after we get input from the public and from CDOT and from the elected bodies. So that's a little bit different than you're used to, but I think if you have questions, just let us know.
Okay. All right.
All,
Go ahead, Bill.
yes, we will have a packet to go to all your clerks, to go into your council, or for Sonia and your commissioner board packet. So that will have materials from Kirsten, from Polly, from me. Apologies, because we'll add an inch to your packets. So we apologize for that.
It's worth the paper. All right. Great. Any questions or concerns, please raise your hand as you're going through. We're going to tidy this up real quick. Bill, can you go over the schedule of the public hearings we have thus far? And just so you guys all know, I plan on attending all of the first ones in person, personally, all of them. And I've already put it on my calendar unless they've changed. The second ones, I will actually be out of town, but I will zoom into all of those meetings. So I will be available at both of them personally.
Yes. Let me pull this up on the screen real quick.
Thanks, Skylar.
So you can see here, our first one is March 18th with the city of Steamboat Springs and their follow.
Hold on. I got Polly's up still.
Oh,
Polly,
we
can
don't
you
want to
stop
do that.
sharing, please?
I think so. Actually, it's not showing that I'm sharing, which is hard. Oh, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, are you,
Here you go, Bill.
all right.
Okay. As you all might see this is an ad that's going to run in your local newspapers a few times over the next month as also part of our awareness for the public meetings. So I'm just using this to go through them. City of Steamboat Springs, March 18th, with the second meeting on April 15th. Town of Yampa, March 19th, April 16th follow-up. Town of Hayden, March 20th, April 17th as the second. Routt County, March 25th, then April 15th. City of Craig, March 25th, April 8th, and Town of Oak Creek, April 10th and April 24th. Also, just so you know, March 25th, we'll go do a courtesy presentation with Moffat County Commissioners. So that's not a public hearing, that's a courtesy, but that's to keep our lines of communication open.
When is that? On the 25th?
That's the 25th at 3 o'clock, Sonia.
Okay.
Bill, when is this going to start running?
This should already have run in the Steamboat pilot this week, and it'll start appearing in the Craig Daily Press early next week.
Thanks, Jay.
Press release goes out Monday, and as part of the public awareness plan that I put together, it's going to go out to everyone. Mike Lane with the city of Steamboat Springs, he's going to push it out to his network. He's going to post it to social media. Others are going to do that as well. I talked to Shannon Lukens. She's going to push it out. Dylan's.
I wasn't sure if you would
It's
make
going to go far and wide.
She said she sent us a note, said be right there. She might.
I think we have need
present
someone to
yet.
mute.
Sorry.
So there's also a push, a public PR press release push that will come together for this as well.
All right. No one's seeing anything they haven't seen before, so we're good to go with those dates that are being published. Looking forward to doing this. Again, you're gonna get this IGA. So Kirsten, once again, just to reiterate, the public hearings that we're gonna have is the IGA that you need from each one of us at least signed beforehand so that we can have these, or at the end of the second one where the resolution comes in?
In my view, Polly, it doesn't need to be executed until later. We just need to make sure that you take action on the second public hearing to approve the initial draft.
Great.
Through the resolution.
Through the resolution.
Yeah,
And
just wanted to double check so people aren't feeling anxious on this, that we still have time to move on it. Sonia, when you're looking and talking to Eric, when he finally gets a chance to review it and comes back, if he has any concerns, we'll catch it during these public hearings.
Are you guys going to send it out with all of the changes already in so that we can see the finalized thing? And I just want our lawyer to make sure that everything they're in agreement. I haven't sent it. I've sent it to the council, but not to them because of the constant changes. I wanted to wait till we were done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, the packet, we'll send out a packet and it'll have the clean versions of what we want reviewed and acted upon. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
And that'll come Wednesday because we have to hit that for some of our first, that's our deadline. So everyone's going to get the packet this Wednesday.
Perfect.
All right.
I'm going to work to schedule another formation committee meeting, and then I think this is our last topic and we can get everyone out of here. Do we want to do one in the middle point between our public hearings in case we have to go through feedback? Yeah, Polly's saying yes. Okay, so look for the Google or the Doodle poll. I will get that out like today. Because at the second hearing, we might need to respond to feedback.
Exactly.
Yep. Okay, that's it for me. That's a lot.
All right, everybody. Thank you for your time on this call. I know it's a little bit longer, but you're part of the heavy lift. So thank you all very much. Look for this information, and on Wednesday we'll get our packet sent out to everybody. And I'm always available, as well as Bill and Kaplan Kirsch. So just give us a call if you have any questions or concerns coming up.
Thanks,
With that, I will
everyone. Good
adjourn.
meeting.
Thank you
Thank you. I
all.
will go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.